She had carried the letter for 4 months. It had been folded and refolded so many times that the creases had gone soft, the way paper goes when hands have worked it over and over in the dark, in waiting rooms, in the front seat of a car before walking into a building and needing to be strong. She had read it so often she no longer needed to unfold it to hear the words. But she kept it with her anyway, in the left pocket of the blazer she had pressed the night before the taping, because some things you carry not because you need to, but because putting them down would feel like leaving something behind. Her name was Vivienne Cole. She was 54 years old. She was standing at the Family Feud podium in a television studio in Los Angeles, and the letter in her pocket had been written by her son. Her son, who had died 7 months ago. Her son, who had written the letter 3 weeks before he died, addressed it to whoever needed to read it, and told her, when he gave it to her, that she would know when the moment was right. Vivienne had not planned to give it to anyone today. She had brought it the way she brought it everywhere because it was his, and his handwriting was in it, and that was reason enough. But then the game ended, and Steve Harvey walked toward her with the specific warmth of a man who pays attention, and something in the quality of his attention made her reach into her pocket. She held the letter out to him. He took it. He unfolded it. He began to read. And Steve Harvey, who has stood on this stage for 16 seasons without losing his composure under any circumstances this industry has produced, went completely, entirely still. Vivienne Cole had grown up in Charlotte, North Carolina, the older of 2 daughters raised by parents who had emigrated from Trinidad in the late 1960s with the specific combination of cultural pride and practical determination that first-generation immigrant families carry as a kind of inheritance. Her father had worked as an electrician. Her mother had worked as a seamstress, then as a tailor, building a small alterations business from the spare bedroom of their house that eventually became a shop on a street she had watched change around her for 30 years. Vivienne had become a social worker, which was the kind of career choice that surprised no one who knew her, because she was the person in any room who noticed who was struggling before they said so, and who had the patience to stay with difficulty long enough to be useful. She had worked for the county for 22 years, specializing in elder care and family support services, and had built a professional reputation that her colleagues described as quiet and thorough and entirely reliable in the way that matters most. She showed up when she said she would, and she did not look away from hard things. She had married her husband, Desmond, in 1995. Desmond was an engineer, meticulous and gentle, with a dry humor that emerged slowly in conversation, and that Vivienne had fallen in love with over the course of several months before she recognized what was happening. They had bought a house in the Myers Park neighborhood of Charlotte. They had built a life with the deliberate care of 2 people who had grown up watching their parents do the same and understood that the building was the point, not the arrival. Their son, Marcus, had been born in 1997. He was, from the beginning, the kind of child who collected experiences rather than things, who wanted to know how every machine worked, who read indiscriminately and with the complete absorption of someone for whom books were not a pastime but a conversation. He had grown into a young man who was easy to underestimate at first meeting, because he was quiet in groups and did not offer opinions unless asked, and who revealed himself over time to be one of the most deeply attentive people those around him had ever encountered. He had studied literature at UNC Chapel Hill and had begun a graduate program in creative writing before the diagnosis arrived in the fall of his 2nd year. The diagnosis was acute myeloid leukemia, a fast-moving blood cancer that required immediate aggressive treatment, and that offered, even with that treatment, odds that his oncologist communicated with the careful honesty of someone who understood that parents deserved the truth. Marcus had received the diagnosis with the same quality of attention he brought to everything else, completely, without deflection, and with what his mother would later describe as a strange, specific grace. He had not pretended it was not happening. He had not performed courage. He had simply continued being himself fully in the time that remained, reading, writing, having long conversations with the people he loved, paying attention to the world with the undiminished interest of someone who understood that paying attention was the most important thing he could do with the time he had. He had written prolifically in those months. Poems, essays, letters. Not for publication, he had published some work before the diagnosis, and he was not concerned with that now. He wrote because writing was how he thought, and because thinking clearly mattered to him more than it had ever mattered before, and because he had things to say to specific people and wanted to say them correctly. 3 weeks before he died, he had called Vivienne into his room and given her an envelope. He had told her it was a letter he had written that was not specifically for her, but that she was to keep. He said she would know when the right moment came to give it to someone. He said he trusted her judgment about that completely. He said it with the quiet certainty of a 26-year-old who had spent 7 months thinking clearly about what mattered and had reached some conclusions. Vivienne had taken the envelope. She had not opened it for 2 weeks, because something in the way he had handed it to her made her feel that opening it before he died would be a kind of presumption. She had read it for the first time 3 days after the funeral, alone at the kitchen table, with Desmond asleep in the next room. She had read it many times since. The Family Feud application had been submitted by Desmond in January, 4 months after Marcus died, 2 months after Vivienne had returned to work, 6 weeks after Desmond had watched his wife move through their house in the specific, muted way of a person who is functional and present and who is also somewhere else, and had decided that she needed something to prepare for, something that required her full attention. Something that would give her a reason to be completely in the present for a defined period of time. He had told her about the application on a Sunday evening, sitting across from her at the kitchen table where she had read the letter for the first time. She had looked at him for a long moment. Then she had said, "Then we had better be ready." And she had meant it, because Marcus had been a person who prepared for things and took them seriously, and anything she did while she was learning to carry his absence, she was going to do the way he would have expected her to. She had put the letter in the pocket of her blazer the morning of the taping without deciding to. It had simply seemed like the right place for it on a day when she was going somewhere that mattered. The Cole family arrived at the studio in Los Angeles on a Wednesday morning. Vivienne, Desmond, her sister Nadine, Nadine's husband Gerald, and Vivienne's niece Camille, who was 22 and had been close to Marcus, and who had agreed to come because Desmond had asked her, and because she understood, without it being stated explicitly, that Vivienne needed people around her who had known him. Their opponents were the Beaumont family from Atlanta, a lively, large-spirited group who played with the easy competitive warmth of people who enjoy each other and extend that enjoyment outward without effort. The Beaumonts were good opponents, present, prepared, and genuinely fun to be in the room with. The main game between the Coles and the Beaumonts was closely contested throughout, and the studio audience, which had been warming to both families in equal measure, found itself in the pleasant position of not being entirely sure which outcome to prefer. Vivienne played the main game with a focused composure that her colleagues at the county office would have recognized immediately as her professional register. Attentive, measured, not easily rattled. She was the kind of contestant who made the game look controlled even when it was not, who gave the impression of having more information than the situation required and of deploying it with precision. The Cole family won by 12 points. As the main game concluded and the studio prepared for the fast money round, Steve Harvey moved through his standard pre-round circuit, congratulating the winning family, exchanging the brief, warm banter that is part of his professional signature. He was working his way along the Cole family when he reached Vivienne, and something in her manner gave him pause. Not an obvious pause, a professional one, the slight recalibration of a man who has learned over 16 seasons to recognize the difference between a contestant who is fully in the room and one who is also somewhere else. She was in both places simultaneously. He could see it. He did not press it. He completed the pre-round setup, and the Cole family moved into fast money configuration. Vivienne would go first. Desmond would follow. The decision to pair Vivienne and Desmond had been deliberate. They had prepared together for 10 weeks, and in that preparation, Desmond had demonstrated a reliable instinct for survey answers, the kind of broad, practical knowledge of ordinary preferences that came from decades of navigating the world with genuine curiosity. He was, the family had agreed, the right person to close. Vivienne stepped to the fast money podium. The 20-second clock began. Name something people keep on their bedside table. Vivienne said, a book. Number 2 answer, 34 points. Name a word that describes a perfect summer day. Vivienne said, warm. Number 1 answer, 48 points. Name something people do when they want to feel closer to someone they've lost. Vivienne said, look at photographs. She said it without hesitation, as though it were the most natural answer in the world, which for her it was. The board revealed it as number 1, 51 points. The studio audience responded, but there was something in the quality of Vivienne's answer, the completeness of it, the lack of any searching quality, the way it came from a place that was not calculation but experience, that shifted the room's energy slightly. Not dramatically. Just the faint collective adjustment of people who have heard something that arrived from somewhere real. Name something you would save first in a house fire. Vivienne said. Family photos. Number 2 answer, 29 points. Name something people wish they had said before it was too late. Vivienne said, I love you. Number 1 answer, 53 points. The buzzer sounded. Vivienne's total, 215 points. The studio erupted. 215 points in a single fast money round was among the highest individual scores the show had recorded. The audience was on its feet before the number was fully visible on the board. Steve Harvey was applauding. The Cole family was embracing. Vivienne stood at the podium and received all of this with the composure she had maintained throughout the day, warm, present, grateful, and also with the specific quality of a person who knows that the number on the board, however large, is not the thing that matters most to her today. They had already won. Desmond did not even need to answer. But he stepped to the podium, completed his round with genuine enthusiasm, and added another 61 points, bringing the family total to 276. As the celebration settled and Steve Harvey moved toward the closing segment, he came to Vivienne's side of the stage. His movement was the same as always, warm, purposeful, professional. But when he reached her, he stopped. He had been watching her all day. He had seen the 2 places she was inhabiting. He had noted the specific answers she had given in fast money, and he had recognized in I love you and look at photographs something that was not the product of survey preparation alone. Before we close this out, he said quietly, not yet to the audience but to her, I want to ask you something, and you do not have to answer in front of these people if you do not want to. Vivienne looked at him. Then she reached into the left pocket of her blazer. She did not say anything. She held the envelope out to him. He took it. He looked at her once, a question in his expression. Read it, she said. He said I would know when the right moment was. I think this is it. Steve Harvey unfolded the letter. He began to read, and the studio went silent in a way it had never gone silent before. The letter was 2 pages, handwritten in the careful, slanted script of a young man who had grown up reading enough to understand that how you wrote something was part of what you were saying. The pages had been handled enough that they moved with a particular softness in Steve Harvey's hands, the softness of something that has been held many times by someone who needed to hold it. He read it in silence. The studio watched him read it. No one who was in that room has ever described fully what they saw on his face during those moments. Partly because description is inadequate and partly because the expression was not one thing but a sequence of things. Recognition, wait, something that was not quite grief because it was not his to grieve but that was adjacent to it. And then, at the end, a stillness that settled over him like a decision being made. He was still for a long time after he finished reading. Long enough that the production team in the booth, watching the monitors, held what they were doing and waited. Long enough that the studio audience, which had been processing the silence for some seconds, understood that it was not a pause before speech but a pause that was itself a response. Then Steve Harvey looked up. He looked at Vivienne first, then at Desmond, then at the letter in his hands, and then at the audience, all 200 of them, in the way a person looks at people when they need to say something and need the room to be ready to receive it. This young man's name was Marcus, he said. His voice was controlled in the specific way that control sounds when it is effortful. He was 26 years old. He was a graduate student in creative writing. He died 7 months ago. He paused. And 3 weeks before he died, he wrote a letter that he gave to his mother and told her she would know when the right moment was to share it. He looked at the letter again briefly, as though orienting himself. I am going to read part of it to you, he said. Vivienne, is that all right? It is what he intended, she said. He wrote it for whoever needed it. Steve Harvey took a breath. He read. The letter, as he read it, did not speak about illness. It did not speak about dying. It spoke about paying attention, about the specific, undervalued practice of being fully present with the people and the world immediately around you, which Marcus had come to believe was the most important thing a person could do, and which he had spent the last 7 months doing with a discipline and a joy that had, he wrote, surprised him. He had not known until he was doing it how much he had been missing before. He wrote about his mother specifically, about the quality of her presence, the way she had always noticed what other people missed, the way she had taught him, without using those words, that showing up for people was an act of love that did not require explanation. He wrote that he wanted her to keep showing up, not for him because he would not need it, for whoever was in front of her. He said that whatever room she walked into, someone in it needed what she had been giving her whole career, the particular attention of a person who refuses to look away from difficult things. He wrote near the end, a single sentence that Steve Harvey read more slowly than the rest. The game show was her idea, he read, and the studio produced a brief, gentle sound of recognition. She applied without telling me months ago because she said our family needed something to look forward to. If she is reading this, or if someone is reading this to her, I want them to know. She was right, as she usually is, and I am proud of her, as I always was, and I will be watching, in whatever way watching is still possible for me because she is worth watching." Steve Harvey stopped reading. The studio did not produce applause. It produced something quieter and more sustained, the kind of collective response that does not have a name but that everyone present recognized as the appropriate one. Steve Harvey folded the letter carefully. He held it for a moment. Then he walked to Vivienne and placed it back in her hands. "He was right," Steve said. "She applied without telling him, and she did not tell us either, not about him, not about what she was carrying, not about why this day mattered. She just came here and prepared and played and gave us 215 points in 20 seconds. He looked at the audience. "I want to say something about that. About what it means to show up fully for something when you are also grieving. Because I do not think we talk about it enough, the amount of work it takes to be present when part of you is somewhere else. Vivienne Cole came here today carrying her son in her pocket, and she played this game as though the only thing in the room was the game. That is not ordinary. That is extraordinary." He paused. Marcus said he was proud of her. "I want to say that in front of these people so that there is a record of someone other than her son saying it. She has earned that." Vivienne received this in the stillness of someone who has been seen clearly and who is not certain in this moment how much of that she is capable of holding. Desmond, standing beside her, put his hand over hers. She held it. Steve Harvey reached into his jacket pocket. He had already spoken briefly with his producer. The exchange had happened during the long pause while he read the letter, conducted in the quiet fluency of a professional relationship built over years. His producer had nodded. "The Steve and Marjorie Harvey Foundation supports families who are rebuilding after loss," he said. "Not because loss can be compensated, it cannot, and I will not pretend otherwise. But because the practical weight of grief has a practical component, and because a family that has spent 7 months navigating that weight deserves something from this day beyond a game show victory." He produced an envelope. "This is a check for $20,000 from the foundation. Combined with your winnings, that is $40,000. He held it toward her. "I want you to use some of it for something that honors him," he said. "Not because you have to. Because I think Marcus would have had opinions about it, and I think you know what they would have been." Vivienne took the envelope. She held it alongside the letter, one in each hand, the future and the past, the practical and the irreplaceable. "He would have told me to give most of it away," she said. It was not a joke, though the room received it gently. It was simply accurate. "Then," Steve Harvey said, "you already know what to do." The episode aired 6 weeks after the taping. The production team had made a decision that, by the time they made it, had become the standard decision for moments of this kind. They preserved everything. The full sequence from Vivienne handing Steve the letter through his reading, his response, and the foundation check ran without compression. It was 13 minutes and 40 seconds. It was the longest unbroken sequence the show had broadcast in several seasons. The episode received the highest single-episode ratings the program had recorded in 2 years. The letter was the thing that traveled. Not the score, though 215 points was noted and discussed. Not the foundation check, though $40,000 was a meaningful sum and was reported accurately. The letter was what people kept returning to, what they kept sharing, what they kept writing about in the comments and the posts and the emails that arrived over the weeks following the broadcast, in numbers that the show's production office described as unlike anything they had previously processed. The sentence that traveled furthest was the one Steve Harvey had read slowly. "I will be watching, in whatever way watching is still possible for me, because she is worth watching." It appeared in messages sent between people who had lost someone. It appeared in grief support communities. It appeared on a card that a hospice organization in Michigan began including in their family resource packets, with Vivienne's permission, because a staff member had seen the episode and recognized in Marcus's words a precision about love and loss that their families consistently needed and rarely encountered, expressed this clearly. Vivienne returned to Charlotte on a Thursday. She was back at work the following Monday, because the work did not stop, and because Marcus had said she should keep showing up, and because she had always found that the most reliable remedy for the formless weight of grief was the specific, bounded weight of something useful to do. She spoke to her supervisor that first morning back and proposed something she had been considering for 3 months. A dedicated support program for family caregivers of elder clients. A structured component of the county's existing services that acknowledged, explicitly and practically, that the person providing care was as much in need of attention as the person receiving it. She had been thinking about it in the context of the families she served, and she had been thinking about it in the context of herself, and she had concluded that the two contexts were not separate. Her supervisor approved a pilot program. It launched 4 months later. By the end of its first year, it had served 63 families. By the end of its second year, it had been adopted by 2 neighboring counties. It was named, at Vivienne's suggestion and Desmond's quiet agreement, the Marcus Cole Family Support Initiative. Desmond, in the months after the taping, did something he had not done since his 20s. He began writing. Not fiction, not letters, journal entries, initially, which became essays, which became a document he described to Vivienne as a record of what it had been like to be Marcus's father, which he was writing not for publication, but because Marcus had demonstrated, in the 7 months of his illness, that writing was a way of thinking clearly about difficult things, and that thinking clearly about difficult things was worth the effort. He shared entries with Vivienne when he felt they were ready. She read them with the careful attention she brought to everything she considered worth reading. On one occasion, she suggested a revision. He made it. She said it was better. He agreed. It was, by both their accounts, one of the better things to come out of an impossible year. Camille, the niece who had come to the taping because Marcus had been her cousin and her friend, began volunteering at a literacy organization in Charlotte the month after the episode aired. She did not connect this decision publicly to the episode. Those who knew her connected it without needing to be told. She had been close to Marcus, and Marcus had believed, without sentimentality, that reading was how people stayed connected to a version of the world larger than their own experience, and that this mattered. Camille had absorbed this belief the way young people absorb the beliefs of the people they admire most, completely, without noticing, until she found herself acting on it. Steve Harvey read from Marcus's letter on his radio program the week the episode aired. He read the single sentence about watching. He did not provide extensive commentary. He said that he had been given the honor of reading a letter written by a 26-year-old man 3 weeks before his death, and that the letter had contained more wisdom per sentence than most things he had encountered in 30 years of this work, and that the wisdom he wanted to share most was the simplest one, that the people around you are worth watching, and that saying so clearly, while you have the chance, is not a small thing. It is, in fact, among the largest things available to you. He asked his listeners to tell someone today that they were worth watching. The response to that request was not something the radio program was equipped to measure, because it happened in living rooms and kitchens and cars and offices, and at kitchen tables where people sat across from each other and said things they had been meaning to say and had not yet said. It happened in the private geography of relationships, which is not visible from the outside, but which is where the important things happen. The letter remained in the left pocket of Vivienne's blazer. She had other blazers. She wore this one when she needed to, which was not every day but more than occasionally, because there were days when having him close was a practical requirement of getting through them, and the letter was the closest thing available. She was not under the illusion that it would always be this way. She had worked in grief support long enough to know that the weight of absence changes shape over time, that it does not get smaller but that you get stronger, and that what feels like permanent damage is frequently the evidence of permanent love in the process of finding a new form. But she was also honest enough to know that she was not there yet. 7 months, then 13, then 18. She was still in the early part of what she knew from her professional life was a long arc. She was doing what she had always done, showing up for it, paying attention, refusing to look away. Marcus had said she would know when the right moment was. She had known. In a television studio in Los Angeles with a room full of strangers and a man who paid close enough attention to see that she was in 2 places at once, she had reached into her pocket and handed someone the most important thing she was carrying. He had read it. He had gone still. He had said in front of 200 people and every camera in the room that Marcus was right. She was worth watching.